and then you worked on a film called Gridiron Gang starring The Rock. Can you tell us how you got involved with that project?
I executive produced that. It was an interesting story. Being independent filmmakers, my father, my stepmother Linda, and I were producing this documentary series called the Desperate Passage series, which ran from 1989 to 94. And it involved at-risk youth, taking them out on at-sea expeditions. Michael Landon, Lou Gossett Jr., Marlo Thomas, Sharon Gless, Eddie James Olmos all used to host them. We had a great pool of talent. And there was a story in the LA Times about this juvenile football team that had hatched up at the local prison. And we had already shot, I think, 5 or 6 films up there at Camp Kilpatrick in Malibu. So my stepmom found the article. She brought it to my dad and said, I think we should do this. My dad said, no, I'm kind of done. I mean, we've done 5 or 6 of these shows on these kids. Let's move on. And she hounded us to really pursue it. So he called probation and said, to us again, we'd like to do it. And they said, oh, get in line. Hollywood's come knocking. And some big studio had the rights to do it. And 3 weeks later, they called us and said, do you want to do it? Get up here. They start practice tomorrow. So my dad, myself, Philip Hearn, Ken Schaefer, and David Johnston, God rest his soul, went up to Camp Kilpatrick and shot for 3 weeks. And a documentary that became known as Gridiron Gang, which as soon as it aired became, in 94, the most sought-after property of the year. I mean, every studio at Paramount got into a bidding war.
Really?
And then 15 years later, we made the overnight success. Yeah, it's out of Columbia for 15 years before we made it.
So yeah, that's a lovely little thing that the filmmakers listening should understand, that Hollywood is not fast by any stretch of the imagination. There's projects that stay in development for decades and decades.
Well, what was really interesting is we went and made Gridiron Gang and nobody would air it for 2 years, and we had already had a ton of success with the Desperate Passage series. We had 13 Emmy nominations. We won like 8, and I don't know. I think it was because it was football, high school football. Who wants to air that? That's that, And then finally,
like everybody wants to see. Like there's so many people who want to watch high school football.
This is 91, 92.
Different. And, okay, fair enough.
Right, different time. Friday Night Lights hadn't hit. So once it got aired on KTLA, everybody wanted it. And it was interesting, too, because a lot of actors wanted it. Mel Gibson, Charlie Sheen. We were talking about John Candy, Cher. As Sean Penn. A lot of people were calling for the rights and wanted to get involved. And then we made our deal with Sony, and they put it on the fast track. And at the time, Mark Canton was the president of the studio, and they were going to attach everybody from Bruce Willis to Andy Garcia to Dustin Hoffman. They had all sorts of plans. And then it went into turnaround. When Mark Canton was shown the door at Columbia, it went into turnaround and sat for another 8 years without, being able to do anything, because they had over $2 million charged against the film. So anytime a producer called us, Alex, and said, hey, whatever happened to Gridiron Gang, it'd be great to make that. Yeah, great. Pay Columbia $2 million, and then we can talk about it, because they had that much invested. So it was a turnaround fee.
And then then they sold it over to Paramount, or Paramount picked it up?
No. What happened was Neil Moritz was a budding producer. Neil is known for Fast and the Furious, SWAT, and just about every other hit Hollywood has cranked out in the last decade. And Neil was somebody who was involved with us early on, and he went on to do Fast and the Furious and SWAT and Triple X and all these great films. And we always stayed in touch with Neil. He's genuinely a good guy. He endorsed my book, as you saw. Mm-hmm. And Friday Night Lights came out, and then we knew We Are Marshall was getting made. Facing the Giants was this big indie Christian hit. And it was like movie after movie. Invincible, we heard. And one thing we have to admit, Alex, you and I joked about this before we started, is Hollywood repeats itself. They copy. It's a copycat industry. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of like, if there was ever a time to make Iron Gang, it's now. So my dad and I called Neil and said, do you want to make it? He said, yes, let's meet tomorrow, but have a cast in mind, because that's what's always stalled this thing out. So I'm coming up with a cast list a mile long: Vin Diesel, Bruce Willis again, let's go with these guys, and Jason Statham, and my wife, then girlfriend at the time, was in the bedroom watching TV, and she came in and she said, I need you to come see something. And I said, I'm busy. I'm making a list for Neil Moritz. And she said, stop what you're doing, come in here and look at what I'm watching. And it was the E! True Hollywood Story on The Rock. And he had been arrested a dozen times before his 18th birthday. He had played at a very high level on a national championship. Miami Hurricanes, was drafted into the CFL, NFL, blew out his knee and started from dirt and made something great of himself. And I watched that 5 minutes, Alex, and I went back to my office. I tore up my list of 35 plus names that I had spent 4 hours coming up with, went into Neil's office the next day. We caught up. Been a while since we saw each other. And he said, all right, where's your list? And I said, I got one name for you. I said, Dwayne Johnson. And he yelled to his assistant, Nikki, when's my dinner with The Rock? She said, tomorrow. He said, get me a DVD of the documentary you and your dad made. 2 days later, we were up at the jail with Dwayne Johnson, walking the premises, and next thing you knew, we were making a movie. I mean,
That was and Dwayne. I mean, he was The Rock, but he wasn't The Rock. Like he was big, but he wasn't what we know of him today.
He had just done Walking Tall, Scorpion King.
He was early.
He had done a few. It was early, yeah, and he was leaving to go do that video game movie he did right after we met. Doom. That.
Yeah, that. Yes, he jokes quite a bit about that, but it was still early on. Yeah, Walking Tall was a hit, and but he wasn't what we can like. The Rock now is The Rock.
Right. and I can't think of a person who deserves the success more. Talk about humble, sincere, gracious human being. I feel honored to say that we're, to this day, 12 years later, we're still good friends. We stay in regular touch. If anybody has earned it and you really know his story, I think you would say it's him. And if you ever get a chance to work with him, run to it. You'll be glad you did.
That's amazing. Yeah, I'm a huge Rock fan. I've been watching The Rock since the WWF days, and I freaking love The Rock.